It is time for the press preview. See what the papers are making of it all. Take you through the front pages as they arrive. We are joined this evening by the Daily Mail's consultant editor, Andrew Pearce, and the broadcaster and former MP, Anna Soubry. And they are going to be with us from now until just before midnight. But let's take you through the front pages that we have before we hear from our guests. On the matter of Sue Gray's report, the Metro has the headline, "We got away with it," paraphrasing, I should say, the words of a former senior Downing Street official in a message to a colleague at the time of the parties. The Eye quotes from the report describing a failure of leadership in Number 10 and indeed across Whitehall. The Guardian mentions the drinking, fights and vomiting that allegedly took place at those gatherings. Here's the FT. It describes the Prime Minister as unbowed by the, quote, lurid details contained in the report. The Mail says what many Conservative supporters believe, that Boris Johnson feels he has been vindicated. The headline, "Is that it?" Similar sentiments in the Express. They say, really, is this what all the fuss is about? The government's insistence that it is time to move on from the matter is reflected in the Telegraph, with the Chancellor poised to announce additional help for energy consumers. As the Sun puts it, the Partygate is over. It urges the PM to get on with the job of helping people through the cost of living crisis. But as you would expect, the Mirror's taken events somewhat different, that Boris Johnson, in their view, is just laughing at us all. Another reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll be seeing on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you are watching us. And as mentioned, we're joined tonight by Andrew Pearce and Anna Soubry. Lovely to see you both. Wish it was in the flesh, but unfortunately we still have to do it this way, don't we? Anna Soubry, to you first. Your pick, starting with The Guardian. And it is the detail of what has emerged today that I think a lot of people will be focusing on. And surprise, surprise, The Guardian choosing to do that.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, it describes the contents of Sue Gray's report, this long-awaited report, drinking, fights, vomiting, all in the day's work, says the headline there. And that's basically the conclusion that she comes to, that there was this culture of partying, which I think actually in normal times should concern everybody and would be clearly wrong in any workplace. But in the middle of the COVID pandemic, really is utterly unacceptable and will appall, I think, almost everybody across the country that this was going on and on such a scale, and clearly within the knowledge of the Prime Minister. Gray's investigated 15 parties, though, as your Sam Coates has quite rightly pointed out, it doesn't seem that the ABBA party was part of her investigation. We'll talk about that perhaps later. But of course, what Gray does is that she absolutely nails the responsibility. And it's a failure of political leadership, i.e. the buck stops, and of course it does, with the Prime Minister. And I cannot think of any other Prime Minister in my living memory who, faced with such a condemnation of this report, wouldn't have done the right thing perhaps some time ago, certainly now, and resigned.
Andrew, take us to the front of The Eye, and it references, of course, that failure of leadership that was in Sue Gray's report. But if I'm remembering correctly, Sue Gray did say it was a failure of leadership by political leaders, but also by officials.
Yes, she does. It's both. But and she makes the point about the political leadership. She says to the top of political leadership. So she's clearly referring to the Prime Minister. That the officials, clearly, it's the Cabinet Secretary Simon Case who's still there. He was at one of the parties, but he didn't get fined. I think less so the Chancellor, who I still think was very unfortunate to get hit with a fine in any case. But I think the reason a lot of people think, Tory MPs are thinking the Prime Minister's out of the woods now, is because her conclusions about the failure of political leadership and the culture of drinking, she made that point in her interim report, which we saw in January. And in some ways, the interim report was more devastating because it was much shorter and smaller, and that was the first time we'd heard those expressions. So although we've got more colour now about what went on, one party where someone threw up and people outrageously being rude or disrespectful to security staff and cleaners, I don't think she's not. There's nothing that I've read that would be a killer blow to send lots of Tory MPs scurrying off to Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 committee, to demand a confidence vote in Boris Johnson's leadership.
I mean, Anne, as we take a quick look at the front page of the Metro, I mean, their headline, paraphrasing one of the senior officials involved in all of this, saying, we got away with it. I mean, we are in a situation now, aren't we, where anyone who picks up a newspaper must know about this story and must have arrived at a conclusion about this story already. Yep, as Andrew says, there's more detail, there's more colour that is coming out, including this particular line, but it's not going to shift anyone's opinion, is it?
Well, I think I agree with Andrew on that. I think he makes a good point, and it's part of the clever management, not by Johnson, because he couldn't manage anything. He's so hopeless. But those around him have clearly done a good management job of how this story has developed, and the more we've learned of it by basically just boring people, ordinary folk. Now, that may well be the case, that there's a weariness rather amongst ordinary folk. What really matters, as Andrew said, and others now are commenting on, is where the Conservative Party is in Parliament. And if they haven't got the decency to understand just how appalling this is, this terrible failure of political, and I accept also senior officials as well, it's extraordinary nobody's fallen on their sword and done the decent thing. It's what Tory MPs are going to do. And the simple truth is, if they don't get rid of Boris Johnson, keep him on, the British people will get rid of him. And in fact, he'll increasingly, because such a liability to the Conservative Party, Labour can be pretty much guaranteed that they're going to win the next general election. He'll be one of the best things for the Labour Party.
I mean, Andrew, I wonder if you might want to pick up on that as we reflect on the front of the FT. I mean, they're describing the Prime Minister as unbowed, and that seems to be a fairly sensible and fairly safe characterisation of how he feels at the moment. But we are still going through a cost of living crisis. His to-do list is as long as my arm. I mean, the Prime Minister, is he entirely out of the woods?
Look, he's damaged, there's no doubt about it, and the report is unsavoury. But again, I think people are weary. There is fatigue about Partygate. You talk to a lot of people and they say, oh, for God's sake, move on. We know about all this. And again, I don't think there seems to be any startling new revelations. We know that,
sure. But Andrew,
we know that the child swing was damaged and all the rest of it. But I think he has got a lot on his plate. I think the dangers for Boris Johnson are the by-elections coming up next month. Exactly. I think they'll lose both of them. He'll lose.
Andrew, just to interrupt,
Sorry.
Andrew. Just to interrupt.
Yeah.
Is there, though, an answer to the question that Tobias Ellwood put to the Prime Minister today? You know, name another Prime Minister that, having gone through all of this, would not have resigned, and probably resigned a long time ago.
Well, I don't think you can't imagine Margaret Thatcher or Theresa May being in Downing Street when there were parties the night before Prince Philip's funeral, which I think was one of the most shameful of them all. And that went on till 4 in the morning. Now, Boris Johnson wasn't there. He was in Chequers. He was a long way from it. But no, I can't imagine any other Prime Minister would have done that. But we've always said about Boris Johnson, haven't we? People factor in a lot of different... They've made allowances for him, but I think he's at the end of the road with those allowances now. He used up a lot of goodwill. He's not a cat with 9 lives, you know, Neil. He's a cat with 99, and he's used up quite a few of those lives.
Although your paper, The Mail, in their headline today, tomorrow, I should say, is that it? I suspect reflecting the view of quite a few people, perhaps, about the content of the Soubry report. So much had it been built up. Welcome back to the press preview. Andrew and Anna still with us. And Andrew, let's turn to you. The Prime Minister wants to be getting on with the job. We will allow him the opportunity to do so. So tell us exactly how he will be getting on with the job. Front page of the Telegraph.
Well, a lot of the papers have got this. The Telegraph are reporting that tomorrow the Chancellor will make a statement to the Commons. It's the last day before the recess for the Queen's Jubilee. A package of measures, around £10 billion worth of measures to help alleviate the worst effects of the fuel crisis. And if you recall, in that rather limp spring budget, mini budget that he brought out in April, part of the help was from October, people would get £200 off their energy bills, but you'd have to repay it over 5 years. So that's part of the loan thing is going to be scrapped. And we think he's going to increase, maybe even double the payment from £200 to £400. There's also going to be help, I think, on universal credit for the poorer families. And it's a recognition that when we discovered the details of the new price cap when it's being lifted in October, what did the Ofgem regulator say the other day? It could go up another £800. They're having to move very, very quickly. Also, rather conveniently, of course, the day after Sue Gray's report, which will help them really move on politically.
Oh, Andrew, you professional cynic. I wonder if Anna might perhaps agree with you or in terms of the timing.
Of course it does. This is the most blatant management of use to the advantage of Johnson, so he yet again gets off the hook. And what's really striking to me is papers like The Telegraph, like The Express and the Daily Mail, all of whom should have bylines by Michael Mouse, because they've turned themselves into Mickey Mouse cartoons of just this sycophantic running with stuff to support Johnson and not actually doing their job. And they don't understand how damning this report is, but it's the breach, not of the rules, but it's the breaking of trust of the British people in politicians. It's serious stuff.
Anna, what of the content of what we understand to be being announced tomorrow? Additional relief for dealing with the energy bills. I mean, that's going to be welcomed by anyone.
All that I care when it comes to this cost of living crisis is that measures are introduced that alleviate the appalling situation that a lot of families who are the poorest in our society find. And any measures that are undertaken to relieve the effects on the poorest in our society, I welcome. But it's not as simple as just this. There's much more that this government should be doing, particularly looking at benefits and how we make sure that those who are the most vulnerable suffer the least in this terrible cost of living crisis. But it would help if we had a competent, honest, truthful, decent Prime Minister.
Well, can I just come back on this,
I'm sure the Chancellor. I'm sorry, because we've only got 20 seconds to go. We will be returning to this topic next hour. Andrew, Anna, I do promise
I just want to defend my newspaper against Anna's outrageous attacks.
We will definitely do that. I've literally 10 seconds to go. Andrew, I am nothing if not a man of my word, and we promise you a right of reply. There has been, I think it's fair to say, some criticism of the way that the Mail has gone after Keir Starmer, full-throated, and perhaps less so with Boris Johnson. But you wanted to respond very directly to what Anna was saying.
What I wanted to say, I mean, Anna Soubry's, it's always intensely personal with Anna Soubry about Boris Johnson. We know she couldn't stand him. That's why she quit the Tory party, set up an independent party, and unceremoniously was dumped by her electorate at the last election. But on the Mail and the Tory party, we've always been a potentially difficult friend for the Conservative Party. Anna doesn't read the Mail enough to know that we've been intensely critical of the government's response to the cost of living crisis, intensely critical of the decision to raise national insurance. And we were right to pursue Keir Starmer because Keir Starmer was not investigated by the police. He was assessed by the police. And when the police saw the new evidence, when the police saw the new evidence, they decided that they would investigate after all. And then the Labour Party had this astonishing revelation that Angela Rayner, who they said hadn't been there, genuine mistake, was at the Durham Hall with Keir Starmer. Now, that's all under investigation, and it was legitimate of the Mail to pursue it.
That wasn't my criticism, actually. I never mentioned Keir Starmer. I'm talking about our Prime Minister.
Anna, I don't want us to spend the next 50 minutes, you two, going back and forth on this, but I will let you have a chance just to kind of answer that point there, make the point you were about to.
Well, I've just said I never mentioned Keir Starmer. I'm talking about the British Prime Minister and trust in politics. Trust has been broken by these rules. And all I'll say to Andrew is this, to say on your front page, is that it? Well, it may not be for the Daily Mail, but for your readers who made extraordinary sacrifices during the COVID pandemic. They couldn't go to funerals. They couldn't say and hold the hand of a loved one who was dying. Extraordinary, as I say, their sacrifices. You dismiss it, what's happening in Downing Street, blatant breaches of the rules. As somebody else said, sticking two fingers up, basically, at the British people. You may dismiss it. The British people will not forget. And rightly so.
Just finally,
as I said, I really genuinely don't want to spend the next 45 minutes of the programme doing this, but I do think it is an appropriate time for us to reflect.
Which was a boring, bland gathering. If that's a party, I'm a Dutchman.
Great. We're going to move on, guys, and we're going to reflect on this key question. I'm going to ask the mics to be muted now. We're going to move on to the key question as identified by both of our guests this evening. The question, whether or not it matters to voters. Well, this is what some people told our political correspondent, Liz Bates. during a game of croquet in West Oxfordshire.
There he is. This is his birthday. That's the head of the civil service. These are sort of sandwiches, drinks. That's him and the Chancellor.
They've certainly had a gathering, and well, then he should face the consequences. Yes.
We had an 18th birthday, a 21st birthday, and a 25th wedding anniversary, all of which weren't celebrated. That was his, 56th birthday? Yeah. Big deal.
I'd give him 3 months.
I think it's run its day.
But let's bring you just a little bit more of what some of the papers are saying. Page 5 of the Daily Express, Leo McKinstry providing further analysis of the situation, claiming that Boris Johnson was able to absorb his punishment without dropping to the canvas due to the sheer passage of time exhausting much of the public. Similarly, The Times claims that the Prime Minister seems to be weathering the criticisms of Partygate, describing him, Quentin Letts describing him as an uncombed, corpulent figure, but one that nonetheless was plodding onwards, a hunched husky in a blizzard. Back to Andrew and Anna. A hunched husky in a blizzard. Anna, what do you make of that assessment of the Prime Minister?
Well, it is interesting because I've never known anybody who brushes their hair with a balloon until I saw Boris Johnson. And I know we can make light of it, and I know people will say it doesn't matter, but actually it does. It matters when you're you're the Prime Minister, for goodness sakes. And you should at least try and look half decent. And he just looks like a shambolic mess. That's because he is a mess, amongst many other things.
Andrew, the Prime Minister clearly wouldn't ever want to go without a fight. Do you anticipate that there will, over the coming couple of days, be a little bit more of a trickle? We've had a couple of names coming out suggesting that they've submitted their letters to the chairman of the 22s. I mean, do you have any expectation that we will come anywhere close to the magic number?
No, because I think Beth Rigby in her summing up was right. There was no killer blow in Sue Gray's report, no silver bullet. I think a lot of the response will be how they respond to the cost of living crisis. We're going to find that out in the next 24 hours in the Commons. But a test, as I said earlier in the programme, will be the by-elections, which I think they'll lose both of them. Particularly the one which will be most painful will be the one in Devon, where the ghastly MP had been watching porn, for God's sake, in the Commons chamber. And there's a majority there, about 24,000. And if that evaporates, that will cause pressure. But it is mid-term. They've been in power for 12 years, and all governing parties lose by-elections. So I sense, having thought if the Sue Gray report had been a lot more serious for Boris Johnson, that he could have been potentially in trouble, I think he's weathered probably the worst of the storm, if you can forgive that cliche.